What's up, everybody? This is Jesse from Mullen the Maker. Today we're going over something I have never done before, and that is welding. First off, I want to thank ESAB for sponsoring this video. I did a lot of research before going into trying to find a welder that I actually wanted, and I settled on the ESAB Rebel 215. ESAB was awesome enough to wanting to partner with this new series I'm doing, which is just a beginner series on welding, diving into it. You never have any experience, but actually learning the process for a DIYer, a maker like myself. So I hope you guys enjoy. This is the first video of that upcoming series, and I'm really happy to be partnered with ESAB. Before we jump into the project, make sure you have all your safety stuff, your hood, your gloves, a jacket, and also some shoes that aren't gonna catch on fire. Also, make sure that your argon or gas, if you're using that, is secured, whether it's tied up to a workbench or just in a secure place. It's not going to fall over as you move around the shop. Let's get into the build. So I figured the first project that I jump into is the workbench. I mean, I only have wooden workbenches in my shop because that's what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years, is just woodworking based projects. And so I needed a metal workbench that I could work and weld on. So that's what we're going to be building today. So I took them over to my chop saw and I cut the legs down to the correct length. And I also cut the side supports as well, so I can start welding those together. Once the legs are cut to the correct length, I actually went through and cleaned them up. They were all rusted because these were cut off, so they were a lot cheaper than buying like the new piece of metal that were in the warehouse. These were just out on racks. So now that all my pieces are actually cut to length, my legs and my side supports, it's time to start welding. So I set up my ESAB Rebel 215 to the S MIG setting, which is the smart MIG setting. This is really cool. All you have to do is pick the thickness that you're welding to. It pretty much does everything else. And as you're welding, the machine will actually adjust, so that way you try to get the most consistent weld across the entire joint. So I start by welding up the legs and the side supports. I use some of the magnet squares that I got from Harbor Freight, put those up, measured it all out, and started doing some tack welds to hold it in place. Then I went back and I welded the underneath part and all around the joint. Now, like I said, this is my first welding project. I have a ton of work to do on, technique, the actual accuracy of my welds and all that. So, you're gonna be seeing a lot of ugly welds throughout this process. But the further and further I went along this workbench, I got better and better, which is really nice. And it was a lot of grinding that I had to do to make those welds better looking. After the short sides are together, I start cutting the long tubes because this is going to be about a 6-foot workbench. And so I actually got 1/8 inch thick, 1 inch by 2 inch tubing. Now this is pretty heavy duty stuff, and so it's going to work out really well for keeping it structurally sound. Now the top that I got is actually 2 different sections, so I'm going to have to weld that together. It's a 1/8 inch top, and I'm going to cut some dog holes in it and things like that, but it is a 2 different sections. So I had to add a middle support in between the side supports, so that way I can actually weld the 2 pieces together. So now that the frame is all together and you can kind of see that the workbench base is complete, I need to do the casters. So I got these casters that are rated for 700 pounds each. So I was like, oh, that's perfect. I started cutting them out. So I went to my drill press, bored out the holes that I need to, and then when I went back and I started welding them, man, it was as tight as you could get. I should have really gone extra big on the casters because they were so tight to the leg width that I cut it as close as I could. Ended up working out in the end, but man, was I sweating it there for a minute. Now, in all transparency, the worst welds that I think I did in the entire thing were the casters. I do believe I have enough. They haven't broken off by any means. I have rolled it outside, inside, and back out, and they've been fine. But they were very ugly welds, and I'm pretty sure I over welded it, but it worked out in the end. So next step, I kind of went through with my grinder and just tried to clean up a lot of the rust on any of the pieces, and I actually cleaned up a lot of the joints as well. Now that that kind of frame is completely, done, it's time to start working on the top and then do the shelves and stuff like that. But I wanted to clean all that up first, so I spent some time with my grinder and went through that whole process. After spending a lot of time grinding, I went through and added some angle iron to the bottom so I could have a bottom shelf where I put my welder and some tools and my grinders and stuff like that. So I used some angle iron, I tack welded it, and then went through and added and made it a thicker weld all the way across the joint. Now I did start blowing through that expanded metal because it was pretty thin. I forgot to adjust my ESOB to the right thickness, and so I was just using on that 1/8 inch thick because that's what I've been using for the rest of the workbench, but I forgot to adjust that down, so it started burning through the metal, but I fixed that. So I want to add a secondary shelf to one of the sides, so I used some more angle iron and then welded on supports for the shelf. Time to add the top. Now the top is going to be a lot bigger than the base because I wanted some extra space along with all the edges to clamp any pieces that I'm welding. But on top of having an extra space on the outside, I wanted to be able to throw some dog hole clamps that I got from Armored Tool on the inside. So I used my drill, I bored out a small pilot hole that I went through and bored out the 1/2 inch hole that is needed for those dog clamps. As you see in the video, I'm actually using some oil. This just keeps the bits from, overheating, and it just prolongs the life of your bit. So after those holes are cut, it's time to actually clamp the piece to the base, measure it out, make sure it's all squared up, and then weld it to the base. So I clamped using my Armored Tool clamps, clamped it all to the base, then I went through and tack welded the bottom. After tack welding the bottom, I went through and actually added some more welds, and then I moved to the top, tack welded the two tops together, and then went through and actually did a long weld. It was a very, very long weld all the way across. Ended up not being very pretty. I tried to grind off the most I can to make it look, you know, better and more uniform, like it's one piece. Didn't happen. Like it just, I just didn't do a good enough weld to even, you know, grind it down to that point. But it's a workbench. I'm not too upset about it. It works. It's flat. It's square. It's good enough for me. So I had some of these sander attachments I got from Home Depot with just some, you know, it's basically a flat plate that screws onto your grinder, and then you just screw on the some sandpaper. So I went through and buffed out the top because it did have some rust on it, and it looks a lot better afterwards. The joint doesn't look pretty, but the rest of it does. Now, this is just something that I wanted to add later on. Is I was building this workbench. I started realizing I'm just putting my MIG gun on the ground. I didn't really like that. So I decided to add a holder underneath, so as I'm welding, I can just actually reach around and put the MIG gun underneath. So I cut that out, a little bit of holder, welded it on, and it worked out really well. Well, and that wraps it up. That's it. It's a pretty simple workbench. I have my cutoff saw on top, my welder underneath. If you notice, actually on one of the sides, I lowered that side support about 1.5 inches from the top. Well, originally I was gonna add an extension table to this, but it just didn't work out size-wise for the space. Maybe I'll go add one later, but I ended up adding, just throwing all my clamps on there. They're easy to get to, and yeah, it actually worked out really nice. But eventually I might add that extension table if I change and rearrange my shop. But for now, I'm just gonna leave my clamps hanging on that rack. Thanks for watching, guys. I had a blast for this project. Thanks to ESOB for sponsoring it. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment, a like, make sure you subscribe. I have more of these welding series videos coming out very soon. Shoot down below some projects you'd like to see. I already have in the works. I'm going to be doing some table legs, coffee table legs, hopefully some stuff for my truck. If you have any ideas though, shoot them down below. Any questions, you can shoot them down below too. I have all the tools that I've used in the description below, so if you want to check those out, feel free. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, all the above. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, learned something. Or if you want to criticize me, do that as well. I am open to any suggestions you guys have, especially if you are a welder. I'm happy to learn from people that actually know what they're doing. So, hope to see you guys next time. See ya.